Welcome to the Medical Ancillary Sales Podcast, your number one source for making money in the medical ancillary sector. Mike and Viv bring you the latest information from lab services, pharmacy, diagnostic testing, and so much more. The latest in ancillary services will be right around the corner. Welcoming the hosts of the Medical Ancillary Sales Podcast, here's Mike and Viv.
Hello and welcome to the Medical Ancillary Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Berg, and joined as always by Viv Hudson. How you doing, Viv?
Good, thanks, Mike. And today you are our special guest.
That's right. I love having guests, but it's fun to go just the two of us sometimes and do these. I was going to say solo podcasts, but I guess a duo podcast.
Yeah. So, Mike, I know that you're pretty excited. We have a new federal lab provider. So I just wanted to ask you, just give me a bit of an overview about what that's going to look like or what that looks like.
Well, and you and I were talking just before we were recording. This federal lab business is not something that people generally get super excited about because A, the numbers aren't as big as you see on the commercial side, and B, there's all sorts of rules and regulations. You have to be, START compliant, anti-kickback compliant. And so consequently, most people that I talk to out there who are in the field are chasing the commercial business, and rightfully so. But I think we've both have had many experiences in this business to where we thought, geez, I wish I had more federal business going because the federal business is nice and steady. And the problem that we've had in the past is, who do you trust? What vendors can we work with that actually have a well thought out model to where they can compensate the sales reps in a fully compliant manner, in a manner that's fully compliant with all federal and state regulations, and still make money off these Medicare samples. So, and we found that with our partner with Genesis, who we had Herschel on the podcast last week. And the reason I wanted to touch upon this again is because right off the bat, we've had people that recognize this opportunity and they've jumped right at it and have had a lot of success right off the bat. So I wanted to just share some of those experiences with everybody else and let everybody know this is a federal toxicology respiratory test. All these federal tests that we're doing, these are good to have in your portfolio. You're not going to make thousands of dollars per test or anything crazy like that. But again, it is nice, steady business, and you know what more can I say about it, Viv?
So I guess a great point that you make is everybody's always been chasing the commercial business, and often it is hard when you're out in the field and you have a doctor and they kind of tell you what percentage of federal payers that they have, and you kind of think, well, okay, well, that's not really going to work. So it's nice to be able to have this particular tool in your kit. So is it mainly just Medicare, or do they cover Medicaid as well?
Well, as we know, they can do Medicaid, but Medicaid does not generally, it doesn't really pay. Obviously, Medicare is a much better payer than Medicaid, but Medicaid samples, depending on what type of test it is, those can be processed as well. Now, but what the interesting thing about the way this lab works is that I've seen a lot of these contracts, Viv. I see contracts from federal labs that are going to sales reps. And some of the ways that they are compensating these reps are not compliant. And if you don't think it can happen to you, just Google people that getting busted for Medicare fraud. Not that there's any sort of fraud on intentional fraud on behalf of these labs, but the law is spelled out pretty clearly in terms of anti-kickback and in terms of how sales reps are paid. And so when we started with Genesis, what I liked about them is they use healthcare attorneys, and they had much more thoughtful answers and a much more well thought out compensation plan for the sales reps that there's no ambiguity. This is fully compliant. So you don't have to look over your shoulder. You can go out and get federal business without worrying about, am I doing something that's out of compliance?
Right. So that takes care of, let's say, your Medicare patients. So what if we have a doctor that has Medicare with commercial? Are they able to send their commercial samples to this lab also, or do they need to go to a different lab?
Well, they can do either. Now, the commercial samples a lot of times are going to be billed out of network, which I know we sell against doing out of network with the hospital billing. Really, the ideal situation is you have the doctors send their samples for in-network billing through one of our hospital networks, and then send all the federal samples through our hospital partner here, through our federal partner here.
Right, and I'm a rep out in the field. Who am I targeting with this particular solution then?
Well, I mean, this is mainly tox. Now, here are the big specialties that are going to be interested. Obviously, pain management, addiction recovery, things like that. Anything in the musculoskeletal world, anything where they're treating chronic pain, those are going to be good targets. But in addition, we're going to have Mark Weiss on next week. Dr. Mark Weiss, I was just speaking with him. He's already brought in 2 accounts. And he was telling me, now Mark Weiss is a retired physician, for those of you who don't know him. He was telling me, he said, this respiratory test, Mike, is an absolute game changer. He's already brought in 2 accounts doing it, and he thinks he can bring in a bunch more of these. And the reason being, he said, when he was working in ER or urgent cares, he would have ordered, double-digit tests per day if this was offered to him. So, I mean, that is another key target right there. A doctor bringing in 10 tests a day, I mean, that is a tremendous amount of money. I mean, for a sales rep, you're looking at, those are $10,000 plus right there that you're making on an account like that. So you have a couple different ways you can go, a couple different specialties you can target, and of course, primary care is also an option.
Right. So, as Mike alluded to there, this particular lab is not just doing tox. They're covering the respiratory test, and we did have a podcast on that last week. But yes, that solution certainly, particularly with Mark Weiss, has gotten off.
Let me add one more thing to that, Viv, just to sweeten it a little bit, because we're getting more and more interest in the bladder cancer as well. We should. If you're not selling bladder cancer, you're doing yourself a disservice. Our federal lab is now offering the bladder cancer test as well.
Excellent.
So they can also add that on to their tox screens.
Excellent. So not only are we going to get people's colds and upper respiratory infections cured and treated quicker and more correctly, we're going to avoid people suffering with bladder cancer as well through early detection. And I was just going to say, since we're throwing in different solutions, I know that the Surgeon General sent out a letter last week, I believe, that it was around the opioid use. So definitely toxicology is going to be a good target for not only the toxicology solution, but going to these physicians and pitching the transdermal program with the pain creams that we have, which are obviously a lot safer than some of your oral medications and help give patients some quite good relief. So
yeah, there's a lot of these programs dovetail, right? Yeah, a lot of these dovetail together, and what's nice about this, like you mentioned, this is helping patients also. I know, and not to go off on a million tangents here, but with the bladder cancer, I was speaking with the pathologist last week. I think we already mentioned this on the podcast. he had a patient in front of him that they found cancer. And when he was telling me about it, I said, well, were there symptoms, or what was the reason that they ordered it? He said, no, it was just ordered as part of the tox screen. The patient qualified. They were over the age of 40. So they indicated they wanted the bladder cancer screen done. Well, he ran a cytology. That was obviously, they found some cell abnormalities, was reflex to the fish. And they found, he said, no doubt about it, this patient has bladder cancer and has no idea that they have bladder cancer. And to me, that gave me the best feeling, because what I was thinking was, I don't want to take any responsibility here for saving someone's life if I'm not going to go on to that length. But you could make the argument, if most doctors are not ordering that test because they don't know that that panel is available. That's what we've been finding out there. So this is really just an education deficit. And thank God, that patient should thank God that there was a sales rep who went in and called on that doctor and educated them on, hey, there's a panel available to test for bladder cancer, and got the doctor to order it. If the doctor didn't order it, that patient likely would still be asymptomatic and that cancer is spreading. And we've already gone through the dangers of bladder cancer, of the long-term risks. I mean, you're not going to survive that cancer if you don't treat it early. So that goes along with a lot of these other programs that we offer. A lot of these testings that we offer allow doctors, it gives them the tools to nip these problems in the bud.
So I guess that's a great segue, because I'm thinking, well, okay, I'm going to go to a pain office and I'm going to pitch this federal lab solution. So, well, you got to think, well, what do we do differently that will make them want to switch? Because obviously they're already sending their tox somewhere. But if you can do it as that value add and say, look, educate them about the bladder cancer, then you bring in the tox as well at the same time, then that sells your solution right there.
Right. You can run the rest. Can your federal tox solution, do they also offer these respiratory panels? Do they offer bladder cancer in addition to the urine analysis? Can they run a bladder cancer screen? Do you know the risks of bladder cancer? So yeah, it really is about building value. I mean, the urine analysis, that is a commodity. I mean, it doesn't really matter which lab they work with. It really just comes down to service and everything else. But these value adds will make it more likely that the physician will use our lab.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, with that, Viv, we're right at 12 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and call it a podcast. If anybody has any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to me. I can get you hooked up with the federal lab. Any questions specifically, I'm here for you. Viv, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Bye-bye.